Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining with us today. I'm Dana Canetto, your host for the Sensitive Soulful Woman Summit, where we're going to be talking about how to empower yourself as a sensitive, soulful woman in all areas of your life, such as empowerment, relationships, mastering your energy, and so much more. And today we have with us somebody, again, so dear to my heart, and somebody that I have entrusted my life with and my spiritual growth with for quite some time now. And her name is Sweigh Emily Spilkin. Welcome, Sweigh. Hi.
So happy to be here, Dana.
I'm so glad to be doing this with you and to be in this space with you. So thank you. Sweigh is going to be talking to us about empath mastery, the art and magic of harnessing your hidden gifts as a sensitive soul. Before we go into that juicy topic, I just want to tell everybody a little bit more about Sweigh. Sweigh is a somatic psychotherapist, soul guide, and mentor for healers ready to embody their sacred purpose. Sweigh has been offering individual sessions and leading soul-centered trainings for empaths and healers for over 15 years. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology and wrote her dissertation on post-traumatic growth, the art of using our deepest challenges as catalysts for spiritual growth. Sweigh's journey into becoming a healer was born out of her own deep initiation through chronic illness and trauma and back into radical wholeness and joy. Sweigh loves to help healers and mystics trust themselves, claim their power, and live a soul-led life. She can be found on the web at thresholdshealing.com. We'll be sharing more of where you can find Sweigh in the end, but Sweigh, again, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. I'm so psyched for what you're up to. It's so timely, this conversation, for many of us as we're waking up on the planet to our sensitivity and starting to really understand the superpower that is, rather than a liability and making ourselves wrong. So I'm so glad that you're putting all this together, and I can't wait to listen to everybody's talks.
Yeah, thank you. And I really do feel that. And as I've awakened more of my sensitivity and understanding the gifts in that, you know, I see how much it's needed, and like in the collective, all these conversations about empath and sensitivity. So that leads me to my first question, actually, that I've been asking everybody is, when you realized, or was there a moment that you realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm really sensitive, and it may have been a moment of disempowerment, or maybe a moment of like, oh my gosh, like, this is what's wrong with me. Wrong.
Right. I like the air quotes.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I think it's interesting because when you ask me that question, first I go to childhood, and then I backtrack into adulthood. And I think in childhood, like many sensitive souls, my happy place was nature, right? So being outside, being alone often outside, being in conversation with the trees and the land and, you know, all the different elements of the land. And that was the place that I really came alive and came connected to myself and found my way home. And if I look at, you know, what it means to be sensitive, it's like, oh, well, if I knew anything about sensitivity and being an empath, and that would have been one of the early clues, along with having the capacity to feel everybody around me, which I did as a child. But I didn't know that that's what I could feel. I just knew that I was feeling everything, and there were big emotions moving through me. And then I went through a period of time of numbing that out. So, you know, college, high school, college, you know, we all find our coping mechanisms, right? What are the ways that I actually have a buffer between me and the world because it's too overwhelming to feel all of this? And so I had my, you know, particular ways of, you know, drinking and smoking and whatever it was that allowed me, partying, and, you know, which was fun at the time, but actually had me get more and more disconnected from my intuitive guidance and my inner knowing. And then it was a process of starting through injury and illness, actually finding my way back. And there were a series of different things that happened, but one of them early on was tendinitis in my arms and hands, which was a repetitive stress injury from working as an editorial assistant in a textbook publishing house.
Wow.
So it took me a while to kind of find my way in the world. And I, like many of us, said, well, I have to, find my way. I have to figure out how to make money. And I like to write. So maybe I'll like to be in publishing. And, 23, and developed severe tendonitis. Basically, my body was saying, get out. You are not meant to be here. This is not the right job for you. But I didn't know what was, but a cubicle in, a suburb, 9 hours a day, 8 hours a day at my computer was not it. And my body started to speak really loudly. And it was through the process of starting to heal from that injury at 23. That was the first. There were many series of initiations, but that one, I started to come into an understanding of my sensitivity, my body talking to me, my body's wisdom, learning that it wasn't just a problem that I needed to get over, but there was something in what was going on with my hands and arms that actually held some gifts. I went to a series of amazing healers, and one of them actually said to me when I was working with her, have you thought about becoming a healer? And I said, no, and she said, yeah, the way that you're responding to this treatment and what you're doing with your consciousness as I'm working on you tells me that this actually might be part of your path. And I was 23 at the time.
Wow.
And that just in the back of my head, I have chills as I recount it, stuck. And I went, oh, there's something here that I need to pay attention to. And it took several years before I found my way into that path, but I did. And I actually find myself now these days having these conversations with young ones who sit in front of me sometimes, or if I'm, in a workshop and a 20-year-old or a 23-year-old or even a 26-year-old shows up and I can feel in their system, and I'm like, I think you might actually be a healer.
Yeah.
And there's something about that recognition. So it was both the getting off track in my own life and my body saying, hey, you need to pay attention to this. And then others recognizing in my soul what I didn't yet have the tools to recognize.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love, as I wouldn't think of it any other way, your emphasis on the body, because it is the body. And I know that so many listening, because of the sensitivity, has had other physical ailments or currently having physical ailments. And so many, like you said, are messages.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, at the very least, it's an invitation back, whether sometimes it is a message and sometimes it's just an opportunity for greater intimacy of like, hey, you've left yourself behind here. And when we're sensitive or empathic, the body is our main instrument for receiving information, but it also is easily overwhelmed and flooded and activated. And so it can start to feel like the enemy.
Right.
And so then we learn how to cope by dissociating, leaving our bodies, going into our heads, whatever it is, traveling. The beauty of sensitive souls and empaths is we know how to fly, right? So it's like, oh, I'm going to be in the spiritual realm and I'm going to be in my intuition, but we leave the body behind. And eventually the body starts to knock on the door and say, hey, you need to pay attention here. And it's like, if we think about especially, this is a summit for women. Great. So I can speak all to women here, especially as women, this is our doorway back to, if I get really woo-woo, the goddess, right? This is our doorway back to our innate divine feminine knowing, is through the doorway of the body, and actually listening moment to moment to the sensations, the impulses, the images, everything that comes through this vehicle that we are. And if we leave that vehicle because we're overwhelmed, which is understandable, we lose touch with our intuition and our connection.
Yeah. So love that. And I think there's so many too that have that same type of distraction. I can so relate to you, is the drinking and the partying, and that being another way to fly and leave the body and whatnot. So
absolutely.
Can you describe in your words what your definition is of an empathic or sensitive soul?
Yes, I was just writing about this actually, because I'm in the process of, I have a 3-part blog series called Anatomy of an Empath.
Oh, wow.
I'm really looking at what is an empath or a sensitive soul, right? And there's the shadow definition and the light definition, and I want to make sure that we include both, right? So I'll just read what I've got here. Empath, one whose nervous system and energy body is uniquely designed to merge with and feel the emotions of another, and also merge with and serve as a conduit for the divine. And this feels super important because that latter part we usually don't get to. We usually just think like, oh God, I'm just someone who like gets flooded with other people's stuff and feel overwhelmed by it. But there's an intelligence to the design of our sensitive systems that, and we're in the middle of, in some ways, like an evolution as humans and as empaths. So rather than being designed as sensitive souls to just take on and carry the suffering of the world, we're actually being invited at this point in our journey to learn how to do that, the last half of that definition, to be conduits for the divine. What does it actually mean to use this sensitivity, not just to merge with what, the suffering, but to also merge with the light, the grace, the beauty, the goodness, and to transmit that, to be an anchor for that higher frequency in our very normal human life, right? So that's part of what, as empaths and sensitive souls, we're designed for.
Yes. Love that definition, especially because of the bigger emphasis of why I'm doing this, which I know I've spoken to you about, and I'll just say it again, of the need for this. Everyone's awakening. We're at that point, like you said, especially right now, the need for us sensitive souls and empaths to understand this aspect of it, right? So we can, and I'm so guilty of it, like falling into the trap of victimhood and just staying there and, like I can't handle it and just wanting to crawl into a rock, and then realizing like, oh my gosh, but I can use this for the greater good, and here I can learn all these tools and embody this way of being. And yeah, there's the shadow and the light always with everything, right? So understanding that, I love that. So I said in the beginning with the air quotes, most of us who are highly sensitive, or maybe, I don't know, there's got to be at least 99.9% of us who think there's something wrong with me. I'm faulty, I'm, not good enough, whatnot, any of that pattern going on in our minds. Can you explain a little bit as to why do we do that as sensitive beings?
Well, I have a theory that I've witnessed in my own system, and then I've also really gotten to see in other empaths and sensitives that I work with. And first of all, one of the things that I write in this Anatomy of an Empath is that there's something wrong with me is the empath's mantra, right? It's like the unconscious statement that we're repeating over and over again in our head. So we all have it. And in part, what it is that because we have the capacity to merge with and tune in to the divine, we know that frequency. When we experience something that's not that frequency, right, we feel pain around it. Like if there's a sense of the darker human emotions, which are also divine, by the way. I don't like this split. I mean, absolutely, my work is all about let's embrace our wholeness and our full humanness, and that includes getting into our grief, our anger, our rage, all of it. So it's all welcome here. But when we start to pick up on those other darker human emotions, especially when they are not ours, and so there's no place for them, right? Our system is registering, I'm feeling some anger, or I'm feeling some grief, or I'm feeling some despair, but we don't actually know where that belongs. And we feel this disconnect from this kind of home base frequency of what we feel when we're out in nature by ourselves, or, whatever our happy place is. Then we look for where do I place this, right? What is the cause of this feeling that I'm feeling here? And generally, most of us are oriented psychologically and not energetically. So we look for the psychology behind, like, oh, what did I do? How am I not good enough? What mistake did I make? What's the problem here that can explain why I'm feeling this heaviness that I'm feeling? So often that there's something wrong with me is an explanation for the fall in frequency that we're feeling in our system, which is a result of picking up usually stuff that's not even ours, that's in the field around us. It's either a particular individual's or the collective, earth consciousness, the collective humanity's consciousness. Good portion of the time it's not even ours, but we're looking for an explanation for it. And so then we reach for that thought, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely relate. So what would be some coping strategies that one can utilize in terms of picking up all these energies, thinking it's ours, and we kind of get stuck in that circle?
Totally. So I kind of divide it into two different categories. There's coping strategies, and then there's the mastery, the way that my language is. And I know in your question, which I love the question because I want to get there, it's a super important question. Your question is more like, what can we do, right? What can we actually do that supports the evolution of our gifts so that we can start to use this as our, our gifts and we can really start to understand that the sensitivity isn't a liability, and we can kind of come into alignment with what we're actually designed for rather than just suffer. Yes. And generally we do coping mechanisms like I mentioned in the beginning, like, drinking or isolation is a big one for empaths and sensitive souls. It's a sense of like, okay, I actually don't want to be a part of this human thing because that's too overwhelming. So I'm just going to go over here and kind of do my own thing and barricade, right? And so often there's a sense of like, let me put up barriers or psychic protection or walls. And there's aspects of that actually can be part of the path to growth, that we need to learn how to have healthy personal and energetic boundaries. Yeah. And so there's something about that that's actually helpful, but often we stop in the walling off or the avoidance and don't actually learn how to work with what else is possible, and so then feel a sense of separation from other people, which then furthers that belief system, there's something wrong with me, right? Yeah. So that's what I consider a coping mechanism, is one of those walling. Yeah. Or flying, that's the other one, escapism, like, not being in the body, which is okay. Like, we have the capacity. I often will use empath and healer synonymously, even though people don't necessarily do healing as a profession, or sensitive soul may not, like, the women who are listening may not do healing as a profession, but their souls are designed to be light workers, if you want to get woo-woo with that term, or, people who are here to serve, so they're healers. Yeah. And healers and sensitives have that capacity to fly, to merge with spirit, to go out of the body and be an image, to be in, connection to our angels, et cetera, that in some ways comes naturally, unless we've shut them down. And we often do shut it down if that was so overwhelming, especially in childhood. It's like too much information. I'm overwhelmed. Got to shut that down. But that's a coping mechanism too. So the two main coping mechanisms for empaths or sensitives are to pull in and avoid and wall off, or to go out and fly. Yeah.
I love that whole point that you made about it's almost like we use these coping mechanisms, which then almost validates our story even more. I just wanted to repeat that because I've experienced that so many times, and I think that's so key for everyone to hear. Because if they're in a situation right now where something could be really feeling icky or daunting or whatnot, I know in my experience, I had to take a look at myself, in my experience, this thing kind of blew up, and then I had to take a look back at myself. And at first I was like, well, that's who I am. That's how I am.
Right.
And then I looked back and said, oh my gosh, that's not who I am. This was just my way of feeling safe in the world, and therefore it was hurting other people in that way. Right. So
Yeah.
it's I love the way that you articulated that. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I feel so touched as I hear you say, oh, that's not who I am. That's just my way of trying to stay safe in the world, because
Mm,
it's actually such a beautifully compassionate view of it. Normally, right, our inner critic, or often that for empaths and sensitive souls, the inner critic is a lot harsher than that.
yeah.
And so it's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me that I'm doing that? And, I should be kinder. And why am I? And to actually have that compassionate view of understanding, no, this was an attempt at love. I was trying to protect myself. So, of course, I was showing up
Yeah.
that way. And then to also understand that's not, when I feel safe and everything's on board, that's not the part of me that naturally shows up. But how do I actually create that safe? That's
Exactly.
the big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be a hard one. It could be a little challenging, but I love it. Yeah. So, you're speaking a lot about this other voice and how that voice chimes in, and we have all these different aspects of ourselves. You mentioned the light and the shadow. So I know working with you, this was so huge for me, because that voice was so rampant at the time. And I'm curious if you can explain a little more as to why it's so important to embrace our shadow, not, not let that take over, right?
Yes, 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 yes. Oh my gosh. So, as a culture, I'll start there. Um, we tend to shy away from aspects of us that we can get, as a culture, we can get personal. So if we get personal, right, in childhood, there are certain aspects that our family accepts and loves, and then certain aspects that they often reject,
Mm,
whether that's explicit or implicit. And that might be, no, big girls don't cry, or no, we don't use those words here, or maybe it's a direct shaming, or just that when we're in our anger we get ignored or it gets shut down, whatever it is. So certain elements of our personality, which can be positive or negative. It might be our joy that's our shadow, by the way. Like if our family doesn't reinforce and support our aliveness and exuberance and full expression and our joy, that part of us might get disowned, right? So certain parts of us that aren't acceptable, aren't lovable, we learn to kind of relegate to the Robert Bly calls it the long black bag that we drag behind us, right? Our shadow, right? And then because we're brilliant, we develop an inner critic to help make sure that aspects of that long black bag don't come out and leak out and get us in trouble, so that we don't all of a sudden display our anger and get shut down, right? Or rejected or whatever it is. So the inner critic's job is to keep the parts of us that are unacceptable back in the shadows. But the problem is that aspects of our soul, aspects of our life force, aspects of our intuition and knowing, aspects of our connection to the divine live in that shadow. So if we never go back and learn how to be in relationship to it, we have to fragment and cut off parts of ourselves. And we can't be in that full sovereign expression of who we are and what we're here to do on the planet. Okay? So the shadow work then means having to turn back and do the hard work of reincorporating those aspects that have been split off and fragmented. Our joy, I'm thinking of you and dance, it's like watching you. Is it okay if I name that? Oh my God, watching you dance. So one of the things that, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to out Dana a little bit, and hopefully you're okay with being outed, but it's like, yeah. So for you in your shadow, part of your shadow has been your life force and your joy and your full exuberant expression, right? That's the light part of your shadow. And it gets to come out in the dance. But as you start to go into dance and actually let people witness it, the inner critic comes in, right? And this is how it works, right? The inner critic comes in and goes, who do you think you are? Oh my God, people are going to think this or that, whatever it is. And we all have our versions of that. But the actual expression of it when you dance is this like life-giving joy and aliveness that's part of your channel to God. It's part of to the goddess or the divine or whatever you want to call it. It's part to your own soul. And if you had left that in the black bag behind you because that part of you was unacceptable, then that part of your aliveness, it's like the Martha Graham quote about, it's our job to keep the channel open.
Yeah.
That channel wouldn't be open, and then we're only half alive, which is heartbreaking for us. And then we go into that shame, what's wrong with us, right? That I'm not fully expressing. And it's also that others miss out and don't get the opportunity to receive, the divine in that moment coming through us as that inspiration.
Yeah.
So this is why shadow work is so essential. It contains aspects of our wholeness, and we need our wholeness. That's our job. Our job on the planet is to reclaim as much of our wholeness, to be as much us as we can, and to live our soul in our bodies in its full expression so that we can give our gifts and allow that channel to be open.
Yes. Woo.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. I think it was with you that I first realized that our shadow are also these light part of ourselves. So that's such a important part of what you just said, because we can often think of the shadow as like the bad parts of ourselves, right? Like the parts of us that aren't not the parts that aren't accepted, but those things that maybe we do wrong or we think wrong. But it's also, like you said, it could be the joy, the dance, those things that we hold ourselves back in. So important. Yeah. So I want to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about like empath mastery, or what you call as the evolution of the empath.
Great. I just have to say, I feel a little dilemma about this word mastery. I've been using it, choosing that word, but and I like it. But the challenge is, because we tend to be, as sensitive souls, very hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
To look that and be like, I'm not in mastery. I'm failing. I'm not doing it right. So I just want to preface this by saying that it's a practice, and our whole lives is a practice of learning how to fine tune our capacity to be more and more ourselves. And this isn't something to like check off the list, like, oh yeah, got it, right? Done. And to not use what I'm offering as an invitation to beat ourselves up, but as a kind of beacon to start to attune to for our own practice. And I myself am constantly practicing. So I'm not at a place of like, although I'm quite masterful in my work in the world and in a lot of ways, I don't hold that I've like arrived somewhere. That's the myth of arrival that can be a little bit dangerous. So I just want to preface it by saying that.
Yeah, I actually love the word, especially, well, because I know you as well. Yeah. But I almost feel like the mastery is, like you said, part of the practice. But within the mastery, there's already that knowing that this isn't bad and this isn't good, and it's all, so it's kind of encompasses in there anyway. So you'll be able to practice that more and be masterful at it. So I actually love it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I love that. Thank you. That's a beautiful reframe. That's true. Yeah. So actually, let me just tune into my notes here again, because this is part of this anatomy of an empath that I wrote up, and these 10 steps that really feel true for me in terms of what I've witnessed in my own experience and then with my clients and students. So the first one we've already talked about, right? It's the main question that you have for all of your people, which is, how do you know? Like, what was the moment when you knew? Was there a moment, or was it ongoing? So step one to empath mastery really is recognizing that you're an empath, and that what you are feeling may not even be yours.
Right.
There's a huge relief that happens when we start to get, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. This isn't even mine. I sat with a client the other day. Her story is really profound. And one of the things that came into her awareness is that right before she was conceived, her mother had twins right before her that she had lost right before birth. And so a lot of what we started to identify that she was feeling in her body and in her field was her mom's grief, her dad's suffering, the twins material, that there were things that weren't even hers. And once we got that, there was this sense of, oh my God, right, like this isn't me, there isn't something wrong with me, but my whole system is steeped in it. So then it's a question of what do we do about it. So step one is recognizing that you're an empath and what you're feeling may not even be yours. The second one is practicing discernment and the ability to identify what's mine and what's not, and how do I even know that. So I have practices that I take people through to begin to start to get really clear about how do I know the language that my intuition is speaking to me to even tell what's happening in my body and my energy field and what's mine and what's not. So that's step number 2. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions at any point, by the way. I can just, I'm happy to keep going. Step number 3, you demonstrated this with the compassion, right? Step number 3 is developing self-compassion and care and feeding, learning how to really care for our systems, right? So rather than beating ourselves up and going, what's wrong with me? It's learning to have a loving stance of like, oh, of course I'm picking up other people's stuff. This is what my nervous system was trained in childhood and steeped in, and maybe even, lifetimes, if you believe in that. Of course this is happening. And, of course I'm scared in this moment. And what can I do to be more loving to myself? And what are the practices like boundaries that I can actually put in place for self-care to learn to work with my system? So that's number 3. A lot of people who are teaching empaths stop at boundaries like that. It's like, okay, boundaries. And that's a huge part of it. It's essential, but I see that kind of developmentally as a step in the process of developing empath mastery, but not the end point, because it's easy to go to overbounded and that avoidant place that we talked about before. Should I keep going?
Yeah, I'm quiet because I'm like, wait, okay, next.
Okay. So number 4 is embodiment, right? So in order to really know how to work with our own energy and learn mastery over what's going on in our systems, we have to be in our bodies.
Yeah.
So that is grounding, that's increasing safety, so it's actually safe enough to be in the body. This is where, for me, the somatic tools come into play here, of how do we actually unwind trauma and come back home into our physical being. So this is part of empath mastery, is finding a home in the body and feeling safe in the body. And one very simple way of doing that is actually starting to train our brains and our awareness to focus on what feels good in our bodies versus what doesn't. And because we're sensitive souls, we're so used to feeling all the input. And usually we're noticing, this is uncomfortable, and I have this agitation and this pain, and then that gets our nervous system riled up in a way that has us feel less safe and less wanting to be in the body. So it's actually scanning for safety, scanning for pleasure, scanning for what's good in the body. Part of that embodiment.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah. And then part of that also includes that embodiment includes clearing practices, really learning the tools for how do I keep this vehicle pristine? How do I make sure that my connection to source is magnified and I'm not walking around carrying other people's stuff? So what are the different practices for handing back and releasing that which doesn't belong to us anymore? And did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. And then learning how to, number 5, learning how to self-regulate. And that's part of that embodiment process, and shift from the fear response into compassion, love, and trust. Because most empaths and sensitives, we're living in a certain level of sympathetic activation. And one of the researchers on compassion, I think her name is Singer, last name is Singer. She's a PhD researcher on compassion, and basically identified the difference neurobiologically, what's going on neurobiologically between when we're in compassion and when we're in what she calls empathic distress.
Interesting.
And empathic distress is when we're picking up other people's stuff, right, and we're having a fear response in relationship to what we're feeling.
Right.
Even though we're empathic or sensitive, we're not actually able to access our compassion because we're in a fear response and flooded by what we're picking up. So a big part of number 5 is learning how to self-regulate and shift from that empathic distress to true compassion for self.
That would be like golden.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's so easy to get sucked in that space. And I know we've talked about this, to get sucked in that space and going back to, I think it was number 2 or something, but still not understanding who I am. And I know I had that question in the beginning of, I'm in a program with Sweigh right now. And I think this is very, I was just doing a workshop recently, and it was very apparent that it was a common thread of like, I don't know who I am most of the time because we're so bogged down by other people's energies and whatnot, or kind of shape shifting into who we think we should be around other people. So,
yes. Oh my gosh, you just described, right? That's like the nature of the empath. It's like, okay, this is too overwhelming and I'm feeling other people's stuff and I don't even know where I am. So I'm just going to live in my shoulds of how I think I should be.
Yeah, my whole life.
Most of us who are sensitive really get trained quite well in that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's number. You look like.
Nope. I was gonna say, go ahead if you want to share the rest. Yeah.
So that's number 5, and then number 6. This part I love because this is related to the shadow work and feels particularly juicy for me. It's step 6 of empath mastery here that I've outlined. Doing your personal psychological shadow work. So discovering and shifting. So this isn't just the shadow that I was talking about before, like the unhidden or the hidden and unclaimed joy or anger. This is also like, what's the shadow, the identity pieces that are keeping us stuck in these patterns around our sensitivity that's not serving us. So that might be like the unconscious agreements or vows or energetic habits that are keeping our kind of maladaptive energetic patterns in place. Like, why do I keep holding on to other people's stuff when I don't want to? Besides, maybe I don't have the tools to know how to shift it. What's going on in the background? And it might be like an agreement I made with mom when I was 3 unconsciously of like, I will hold your suffering because I know you don't know how to do it in exchange for safety, belonging, and love. Right. So that's an example of like an unconscious contract that's there, that's common.
Yeah.
And part of the work of coming into empath mastery is actually being able to unwind those past patterns, to know them, to reconfigure them, and to write the new agreements. Yeah. And not just from a cognitive standpoint, but on a soul level, remapping those.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's number 6. And then let me look here on my notes. There's a lot in there because there's different aspects. There's identity structures, there's energetic habits. So it's really unwinding all of those. And number 7, doing our light work. And not our light work as an escape from the suffering, but once we've actually come into relationship with our shadows, we're in our bodies, we understand our nature as empaths, we have our clearing practices, we've unwound the past agreements, the unconscious agreements, then we can start to discover what's the nature of my gifts as a sensitive soul, and how do I start to bring them to the world? What's my medicine, right? Who am I? That question that you were asking yourself, like, okay, who am I? And the program that you're in right now with me, the Courting Your Medicine, is all about that. How do I actually not just do the work of constantly clearing out the shadow, but come into full alignment with who I am and what my gifts are and how I can bring those out into the world?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
Yeah, and I want to make a point to that. another reframe in a way of how I think many of us go through this healing process. I'll speak for myself that it can be quite, and I don't know if addicting is the word to use, but there's so much that can get excavated. And then there's more of the, oh my God, there is a lot wrong. There is so much wrong with me. There is so much wrong with me. And then it's like, and then what else do I need to clear? And what else do I need to clear? And what's so beautiful about quoting your medicine is it, like you said, it's like, yes, there's clearings, but it's almost like there's clearings as you're bringing in what is yours and the gifts in that, rather than just the clearing and seeing all the muck and the stuff that we then judge ourselves for.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the empath's hobby is, or the sensitive soul's hobby, right? And I can say this lightly because I am one
Right.
myself, but is the like what needs to be cleared.
Exactly.
It's the practice of clearing, of excavating. Where's the muck? What needs to be changed? That's the shadow of being a healer, is that we can get stuck in that and actually forget that the whole point of that is to come into relationship with our essence and get to beam that out into the world and be who we are and be in our well-being and our joy and our love. Like that's the point.
Yeah.
So that's number 7 is doing our light work. And then part of that, number 8, I have raising and maintaining our vibration. So that is important, right? It's part of the being able to root in and maintain the light work. But often people will skip all the other things and just go to, oh, I need to raise my vibration. But actually, if what you're feeling is unprocessed rage and you skip over that and just want to go raise your vibration, that doesn't actually help us on the path to wholeness. So we want to make sure that that's in service of, we've got everything else. We're doing our, the shadow work, we're doing it all. And now, okay, what can I do to help me feel clear? Maybe it's dancing, maybe it's laughter, maybe it's nature, maybe it's physical touch, maybe it's listening to music. What are the things that help us actually hold that vibration of joy so we can stay connected to the divine? And then the next 2 are part of that too. So 9, developing our spiritual allies so that we can let go of that which is not ours to carry. So what's our connection to the unseen world, and how can we be in relationship with that so that we can really be fully who we are? That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And then finally, the last one, number 10, is about becoming the lights in the darkness. How do we actually develop the kinesthetic and somatic practices? So it's not an idea, but it's a felt sense experience of merging with the divine and being able to hold the frequency of love, even in the face of other people's suffering. So that when we're doing that, rather than just merging with and becoming the suffering, right? And that can be true compassion. We can be crying with them or feeling our love for them or whatever it is, but not lose that vibration of the divine in relationship to their suffering. And so what are the practices that we can actually do? And that's part of what I teach, to be able to hold that light. Yeah.
Love all of that. It's such a beautiful full circle. Like, just as I'm listening and I'm even feeling myself move through each of them and just knowing your work too, it's perfect. So I know we might even be a little over time, which is fine because I think that this information is so valuable and so important. But I do want to ask you if there's anything as we wrap up, any last comment or quote. I've been asking everybody on this to just add what they want to add to the audience as their last sentiments or offering.
I think it's just encouragement is what comes up. It's like, it can feel really daunting hearing all of that. Like, oh my God, I have to do all of that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, as we take each step, we feel more empowered and more in relationship with our own souls and what it is that we came here to do. And that's the food and the fuel that keeps us going. So to not think that we have to have mastered all 10 steps to get to, again, this myth of arrival, that if we're just in step 1, and it's not always sequential either. It's like, oh, sometimes I'm at 2 and sometimes I'm at 1 and sometimes I'm at 7. But if we're just at that first place of recognizing, oh, this might not even be mine.
Mm.
That in and of itself is already the beaming of the light of the divine. It's already the step towards bringing our essence into the world. And often we look at the gap, where I am now and where I want to be,
Yeah.
right? And so I want to invite us all to look at how can we honor where we are now as in and of itself this huge gift
Mm.
and a blessing. What can we do to appreciate exactly where we are in this moment rather than focusing on the gap, which brings us back to that question of what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
There's nothing, my final sentiment, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong.
Perfect last sentiment.
Yeah.
Oh, Sweigh, such amazingness, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that everybody can find you, because I know how, as I say, amazing your work is, and I want to make sure that they have complete access to what you offer. So can you share your website again and any other place, social media or whatnot, that people can find you?
Great. I'm pretty simple in terms of social media. So it's really, I just use my personal Facebook page, and my name is Sweigh, and I'm probably one of the only ones. So I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. I do have a fan page. I don't use it that often, but you can join me there too. I'll probably be migrating more over there. And then my website, for now, I'm actually in the process of a redesign, so it'll be different in December or so. But right now, it's www.thresholds, with an S, thresholdshealing.com, thresholdshealing.com. And yeah, reach out.
Great. And I also know that you are sharing a free gift, offering a free gift. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So one of my favorite things to do is lead people in their connection to their own divinity, right? As I know that is yours as well with the body divinity work. So I have a 30-day meditation program called Opening to the Divine that's includes many of the practices that I talked about here as the empath in the Empath Mastery. So I'm offering one of my favorite meditations from that 30-day meditation program, just as my gift, as an act of love for everyone, to help them just come back into alignment and connect with themselves. So hopefully that'll really serve.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you again, Sweigh, for being here and sharing your wisdom. Rich stuff.
You're so welcome. It's such a pleasure. I feel like I could talk about this with you forever, and
Completely.
Grateful to be included. So
yeah, I'm grateful too, really grateful. And I just want to thank everybody else for tuning in and being here with us today, and make sure that you tune in to the next series, and wishing everybody a beautiful day. Bye-bye.